I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
Hello, hello, hello. How are you?
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah.
I'm getting rest. I'm well rested and realizing that that is what I needed to be doing in my life. It's just like my body, energy, mind all took a serious, now I just need to take some time and do some resting. So yeah, I'm here, and I'm feeling well rested.
I'm glad. I think all of us have had to, get a little extra sleep, having the clocks change on top of this very long and exhaustive election process coming to a close. I think it's taken the wind out of a lot of us. So,
Now we're weeks after our election,
yep.
and there is some form of there that people are starting to feel what the impact is, right? We hear the narrative of folks talking about, the decision was made based on the economy. Our economy has been difficult for a lot of people to sustain just like the needs that they have living, but we also are not at the worst part that our economy has ever been at in our history. So I know that there are elements that are not being spoken into in regards to what the election looks like. And I would just like to kind of bring that into this conversation because I think it's really important to have these conversations because we cannot ignore the realities of what the impact is going to be looking at like. And we cannot ignore all of the isms and the othering. We were trying to come up with a word that kind of all encompasses xenophobia, that encompasses gender biases, that encompasses, all of the isms and
Making
all
up
of the things
words
that we
here.
know
Yeah.
that exist. Um, and just like what are some of the impacts? Because folks, there's the PT25, the Peaceful Transfer of Power campaign, and that is asking for us to stand together, unified as a nation. And as we're doing this, we're seeing, you're telling me that white nationalists are, walking the streets in Ohio doing horrible chants.
There have been a couple of, Ohio has definitely been a hotbed of, because we had before the election even, we had the narrative about the Haitian community in
Community,
Springfield
yeah.
that was so hateful and
Hmm.
nasty. And then over the weekend in Columbus, just this past weekend, we had white nationalists that were walking the streets of Columbus with their swastika flags, chanting horrible racial slurs.
What's
And
up, Ohio? What's going on up there
what
in
is going
Ohio?
on, Ohio? If you live in Ohio, you're listening to this, come on, comment on one of the platforms and tell us what is happening. And, you and
Mhm.
I, when we were talking about this, we were realizing and noticing that Ohio used to be considered a swing state, but I don't believe
Mhm.
it's in the list of swing states anymore. I think it's gone hard right. So, of course, the whole country is definitely a red country. Of course, probably already
Mhm.
was, and we just finally got real. So yeah, we're definitely seeing an uptick in things. I mean, we knew that if he got elected, that was definitely going to embolden. That's the one thing I feel like he's done more than anything else is to
Mhm.
justify on some level and to rationalize the increase in the rhetoric. You don't have to hide being a hateful racist anymore. It's almost a badge of honor. I consider the red hats and the Trump stickers on the back of car bumpers to be like the new Confederate flag. It's just the in thing, the in way to let people know where your ideology is. So it's not new.
No, it's not new. And then
Books.
there's this
Yeah.
narrative about more people from different identities having been supportive of Donald Trump. And so the
Yeah.
larger connection is being supportive to this ideology of white supremacy still existing,
Yeah.
right? And that being a major component that needs to be addressed, especially because when you have these narratives about it just being economics and you're not really addressing the fact that there was a gender bias, that there was a race bias, that there was a class bias, that there are all of these components that do make up the foundations of the nation of the US, it's really harmful when people are not accepting that. And I have like a perfect example with one of the organizations that I work with, and thinking about building out the campaign. And then there's this question of what type of violence are we expecting to happen after the election? And folks saying that, oh, there shouldn't be violence because the folks that we experienced violence from before won this time. And so there's no reason for them to be unhappy. And then the folks that didn't win this time, nobody has an expectation of that being an agitated group of aggressive human beings in responsiveness to the election, because those that are currently in power are saying we're going to support a peaceful transition. That's our democratic way of being. And as we're seeing that, we're still experiencing that a mass of human beings in the United States received texts that told them to be prepared to report to plantations, which then brings up like historical trauma of folks that are, of the African diaspora being back in this horrible experience of the slave experience in our U.S. history. Then you have folks walking around chanting. You have people looking at you crazy in the walking down the street in the stores in the airport, like daring, like almost enticing and daring someone to say something or to be in some type of responsiveness. And this is the moment where people are going to really start to feel the impact of the decision that was made for the election. And what's the responsiveness of that impact going to be? I've, already had an idea, and everyone knows that I chose to go to the country of my ancestors.
Yeah.
um, so yeah, but hearing what other folks are experiencing is real and a lot. It's a lot to have to deal with, which is probably why I was so exhausted. Even not being present on the territory, still having some impact from it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally get it. A couple of things that come up for me in listening to you talk about that. One thing is the increase of the voices of indigenous communities
Hmm.
rising up. And I think that's not necessarily in response directly to the election. I think if I had to guess, I would think it's in response to the genocide we've been watching in Palestine and in Sudan and in Congo of the past well over a year, with all of those communities combined, showing this real. I don't know if you saw the video that was circulating on social medias of the parliament in New Zealand and indigenous members of parliament in response to a piece of legislation that was going to impact the indigenous population directly in some adverse way. And they broke into the haka, and they did that on the floor of the parliament, and it was unbelievable. And the person that led it, or at least one of the main, I believe she was a parliamentarian, and as she's doing the haka, she's ripping up the speech, and it just, or maybe it wasn't a speech, it might have actually been the legislation that they were protesting, but they did this on the floor of the parliament, and it was incredible. And that's the kind of amplification of indigenous voices that we have been seeing on this U.S. territory, Turtle Island. We see the indigenous population here rising up and talking more about land back. So I do feel like something is happening with all of this. Not only is it emboldening, my hope is that not only is the election and the genocide that we've been watching, genocides, there's multiple over the course of the past year happening on live stream, those things together not only are emboldening his supporters and the supporters that want to keep us in this cycle of supremacy and white supremacy specifically, but also the voices of the indigenous to rise up and stand against it and stand in their truth for that. And that's my hope. At least that feels like what I'm seeing, but I also understand that the algorithm feeds to you what you want to see. So
What you want to see. Yeah, I
yeah.
mean, but there's a real conversation that are happening in different communities that I've been experiencing. Like, as a Black identified woman out there, there's this feeling of, all right, now we've been on the front lines doing the work for so long, and that does not discount the work of other human beings that have been in the struggle towards our liberation. But there also is this sense of, all right, now y'all gonna have to deal with what we've been telling you that you're going to have to deal with.
Right.
and not listening and not coming together in the ways that we needed to have a different existence and a reality now. And the level of exhaustion is just like enough is enough. There's only so much we,
Yeah.
can do at this point. So, in the context of those narratives, in the context of not really having a lot of patience, at the end of our last conversation, if folks, I hope that you go and listen, but you just offered a thank you to me, and it was in a moment where I was just gonna receive that because there are so many times where all of us we're not being acknowledged and we're not open to receiving that people are acknowledging the work and the effort that actually was put in to that has been being put in for all of our liberation. It's not just specifically for one group or wherever you're affiliated, where your affinities lie, but it is that if we are making sure that the least of us have, then the most of us benefit. And that's just, even understanding that in economies, the 80-20 rule, 20% that has the wealth and it's getting lower and lower and lower in our days now, but we need to be thinking about where the greatest impact can occur for the largest majority of folks. And yeah, folks is tired. Folks are not willing to put up with it. Folks are looking at different ways to exist and live. I'm curious to see what the exodus out of the United States looks like because I know that it was happening before,
I saw
but
a
folks are
report on
talking
that.
about it.
I saw a report on
Hmm.
that a couple of days ago where they were saying that the web traffic looking up
Hmm.
how to get out of the United States went up 1,500 and something percent
Yeah,
after
man.
the election. But I also want to acknowledge that that takes money to do, it takes privilege to be able to pack up and go. And then also too we've been watching in the past week, the cabinet picks have been starting to surface and people that Trump wants to nominate for some of these really pivotal roles are some of them. I mean, it is the ultimate clown car of
Hmm.
suspects, and the violence has already started, right? In
Yeah.
terms of just floating these names at all, like Matt Gaetz for attorney general. We elected a guy who's a felon, so all bets are off with that. But we want to put a guy who's been investigated for child sex trafficking and having sex with
Mm.
minors as the attorney general, as the top cop of the. I mean, I don't believe in the cops anymore, but just the ludicrousness of that is, not surprising, but violent just in the suggestion of it, really. So
Hmm. Yeah, the legalization of othering is what we are about to experience, and that's about to be co-signed. And it's not that we haven't experienced it in our lifetime, it's just that it's going to be, to your point, folks are going to be emboldened and stepping into their autonomy and their desire for that to exist. Are you talking to white folks?
I am. I had a conversation with a white couple. The gentleman was the head of the Chamber of Commerce in another city in my state. And so we had some interesting conversations. And yeah, I'm talking to as many as will engage in the dialogue.
What's the conversation though? Like the real conversation, because we had this conversation about there's going to be the facade, right, where everybody kind of
Mhm.
gives you on the front, but then
Right.
what's the real conversations that are happening?
For myself, when I'm faced with that, it tends to be kind of liberal talking points and pointing fingers at others that got him into
Mm,
office, that whole deflection piece that whiteness likes to do so well. And that a lot of liberals have, they're weeping in their soup because of the outcome of the election. And I responded to somebody today on a social media thread that wanted to point fingers and say that it was all somebody else's fault and there's nothing we can do. And it's like, no, it's our fault. We put him in there and now we have to rise up and do what we can. And it was on a thread of a black woman who was saying, "Where are the white people? Why aren't y'all in the streets?" And this other white
that
person
part.
came in and tried to tell her why that wasn't going to be a thing because we're all so upset and we're all clutching our pearls and we're all depressed and all the things. So yeah, the conversations are
Wait, okay, hold on, let's run that back. Who's so upset?
whiteness. white liberals we're just devastated that he's gotten voted back in. I know, I know, I know.
Because when whiteness is upset, it looks totally different than
Hmm.
what we're seeing right now,
Yeah,
as like no responsiveness. And that's the thing that's been very interesting to me, is
yeah,
that there was not a lot of conversations before the election, political conversations, ideological conversations. And even with myself going into mixed company spaces, especially when I was, across the water during the election time period, after the election, there has not been, unless there's an intentional gathering space to talk about the
yeah.
impacts of the election. Just on in my day-to-day movement, going to meet up with a doctor, going into the grocery store, and all of those things, there is no conversation about the election at all. I'm not hearing people talking about it. It's like a very delicate dance of how you want to show up and be present, which I'm finding particularly interesting because speaking to the fact that there were such a diversity, a majority, let's just name the thing, a majority of white identified humans voted for Donald Trump. And then you had a diversity of other people with other identities who identified and voted for Donald Trump. And we don't want to skew that narrative with that being that so many diverse people are in support of what's to come as far as the way that we're going to exist under our
A
legislation.
very
But
small.
it was a small amount. And there is also, the reality that people who are going to be impacted from marginalized communities feel comfortable in white supremacy, feel like they understand what their place is. They know what to expect. They're
Failure is
living in it. There's
always
there's
more.
not a there's not
Yeah,
a discomfort, right? Some people don't really know how to exist in a liberatory life. And so I'm going back to like where my foundational construct comes from with this desire to block the things that are harmful,
mhm,
broaden our network of relationship and resources and connectedness with each other so that we can build the vision for the reality that we want to exist in. And again, naming that Black identified women that I've been in community with are tired and don't feel like being in full leadership,
yeah.
not seeing white folks who are saying that they are impacted or so traumatized about it, standing up and coming out in any way, shape, or form. And maybe this is not the time. People are still like having it settle in, and are curious about what it is that we can expect. And then I'm hearing fringe conversations about other non-white identified communities who are like, oh, wait a minute, we didn't think about they're serious about mass deportation.
Yeah, that came
Um,
out a couple of days ago that yeah, that's like
that
one of
they're
the most invasive.
serious about that. Like this is policy and
20
legislation that's going
million
to go forward.
humans. Yeah,
Yeah. So what is that going to start to look like?
yeah,
To your point about the 501(c)(3) legislation, naming organizations terrorist organization if it doesn't align with like kind of the the national narrative about what's acceptable and what's not acceptable. So there's a lot of things that are coming down the pipeline at this point that the impact to different communities and different people is about to be real
yeah.
in a way that it's existed before, but now it's going to be in your face.
Mm-hmm.
What's your plan going to be?
Yeah.
And I am very cautious of other folks. That might be another reason why I'm like just in the house. And I'm in a different country. So like, this is not what the rhetoric about the United States. I communicated this before. It's like, oh, they real racist over here. Don't come over here to our one love community
Be bringing
with
that
that.
with you. Yeah,
Don't
yeah,
bring that into the space.
yeah,
And so, yeah, I find all of this very, very fascinating. And what does it look like as different factions in communities start to think about the ways that they're going to be building power amongst themselves, and then a larger opportunity to build power. Like, how
mhm,
many times are we going to see indigenous populations, however folks are defining themselves, having to do your indigenous dance in protest and opposition to harmful legislation that's going to be coming out impacting like communities? That's real. And are people going to want to be talking to each other when we need folks to be talking to each other right now. Yeah, we're seeing that white power is being built. Like the white power building is happening. It's like in our faces. If more groups of people get emboldened to get out on the streets and dress up and wave flags and yell epithets at humans, then we might be seeing that. I'm curious what it would look like, what Black nationalism would look like. You know, I remember that one of the conspiracy theories about Puffy being targeted in this moment is because he was speaking about building a Black political project and having now enough resources, money, reach, and a network of other people with a lot of power. And that has been derailed. That conversation has not gone as flourishing as it was before because he's imprisoned at this point. But there is an opportunity or a possibility that we will see this demographic of humans in a tribalist kind of way, getting together, building power, and also amplifying their voices in a really strong way. And there's the potential also for us to see clashes of that happening. And that's one of the concerns post-election that people are being wary of, and people are really determining like where they're going to fall within their energy and effort to continue to stand for this kind of liberatory vision of the United States,
Mhm.
or if they're just going to fall into the comfort of what we have been living under, which is white supremacy.
Yeah, I mean, we talked a little bit about this in the last episode about how, speaking specifically to the to whiteness, how we don't know how to exist in a society that isn't specifically built for our comfort and surrounds around our comfort. And so when I'm hearing you talk about those different things and how white people are not gelling after this, like my friend said on social media, where are the white people? Why aren't they in the streets? First of all, I don't know that it's really totally hit for everybody that the impact is going to be real in our backyards, in our households, in our living rooms, in our kitchens. You know, we give lip service to it all the time, but I don't know that we really have totally internalized that. And what comes up for me as I'm listening to you is also that concept that I've had to really unpack in my own brain, is that, am I organizing for, and you called me on this, is it better to be doing something for someone or doing something with someone? And I've heard people say all the time about how do we really understand that freedom for Palestinians means freedom for ourselves? You know, do we really get that? And we, I mean, anybody who looks like me. And so to me, that feels like it's in that similar bracket, that we're having that come to Jesus moment, which I think is really interesting, that we can point to the map and we can point to the statistics because we know how many white people voted for him, and say, actually, we put him in there. So and now this is going to impact us as much as it's going to impact other people. And what are we going to do about it? And I think we're in a place where the greater collective, I mean, I've seen a lot of people still talking, organizing, having meetings together about specific pieces of legislation, how to push back,
Hmm.
mobilizing people to call their senators and their representatives, especially about this nonprofit legislation. So I have seen those spaces, but I'm connected to those spaces because I was organizing before the election.
Hmm.
Anybody that wasn't in those spaces before the election are not going to be connected to them now. And so
Right.
it's like, so reaching out to people and going, hey, don't you want to come join me in this meeting or come join me in this Zoom call, or let's talk about, this piece. I still have white people going, don't activate me.
Because what would white people be getting in the streets from? Like for? What would the
Right.
purposefulness be at this
Yeah.
point? Because right now it's to sit back and see the benefits of
Yeah.
privilege that might come your way,
Yeah. I
you
mean,
know?
I don't know. I don't know what it would seem like the ultimate hypocrisy, kind of like the Women's March after he was elected the first time, that a million plus women, an intersectional gathering, but there were a lot of white women with the
Hmm.
pink hats, and 52% of us voted for him in that, so it's like, how do we getting into the streets after we just voted him in? The hypocrisy is very real. So And I understand that not all white people voted for him. I know I didn't, but it doesn't matter whether or not. It's like, what do we do now? And I'm listening to the voices
Absolutely.
of I'm listening to, Palestinian voices. I'm listening to organizers of color that have been on the ground, that have been doing this work. I'm showing up in solidarity. This is me personally. I'm doing, lending my skill sets and my voice wherever I can. And I'm talking to white people that are in my orbit to try to, see how many accomplices I can drum out of that group. Beyond that, I'm not sure what else I can do as one human, but I got to do something. I can't, sit around and twiddle my thumbs. So,
I think that there's going to be opportunities for a lot of power building in community amongst individuals. And I'm also curious to see what that looks like.
yeah.
If we're going to be seeing like a mobilization of folks based on race, a mobilization of folks based on gender, what the intersections of that looks like, what your ethnic background is. Most people that are on US territory experience themselves as US citizens unless they're trying to get through that process. But they also have their connectedness to their ethnicity. That's what we want to say. There's going to be pieces of that, and then
Yeah.
what does that look like? Like as those groups of folks, as Indigenous people continue to mobilize, as Black folks continue to mobilize, as Asian folks need to mobilize, as folks from the Middle East and Southeast Asia need to mobilize because the legislation will have some impact on them. And then it's also going to look very different on a state level when you have larger demographics of migrant communities and populations that are US citizens now living in certain demographics in certain areas. Yeah, something to watch out for, something to be thinking about.
There's a lot going on. If you're listening to this or watching this, I hope you stay involved. I mean, yes, we need to reset. Yes, there's a level of letting it sink in, as you said, but we got to keep moving. It's staying engaged. Hashtag stay engaged.
Why do I give a fuck? Why do
Thanks for
I
joining
give a
us.
fuck?
Until next time,
Why
as you
do I
move
try
throughout
so
your day,
hard?
continue to ask yourself,
Why do I give a
Why Do I Give a Fuck
Why do
is
I
produced in
give a
collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.
Why do I